You see, one of the largest delusions that avoidant individuals cling to when you distance yourself, when you go no contact, is the illusion of control. They feel that by being quiet, by establishing space, by retreating behind that emotional barrier, they're the ones in charge. They feel if they don't reply, if they don't feel they're safe, safe from hurt, safe from rejection, from vulnerability. But here's the reality: that type of safety doesn't exist. It's not strength, it's false security in the disguise of strength. If a person has an avoidant attachment style, they're motivated by this deep subconscious desire to be in control, to not be dependent on anyone. Along the way, they've learned somewhere in their life that being close is dangerous. To need someone is to lose oneself. So they create emotional barriers, believing they're safeguarding their heart. But those walls don't simply keep others in, they keep selves locked in. And when you go no contact, when you take your energy, your attention, your emotional investment away, you break that illusion, you rattle the ground under their illusion of control. Suddenly, silence doesn't feel like power, it feels like emptiness. You see, avoidance finds its best home in predictability. As long as they have a guarantee that you'll call, that you'll pursue, that you'll be there attempting to repair the connection, they can remain comfortable in their distance. They can have the fantasy that they don't have to change. But when you remain quiet, never out of manipulation, always out of self-respect, you disrupt the pattern, you reclaim your power. And here's what occurs: the avoidant becomes aware of the silence in a different way. Initially, they will feel relieved, believing to have reclaimed their space. But gradually, the relief gives way to restlessness. The silence becomes too loud. The space that they so desired starts to feel chilly. What they're actually hoping for secretly is that they can retreat behind the shield of control without losing contact. They want to think they can withdraw and still have you waiting. That's the fantasy: comfort without responsibility, love without risk. But your silence, your refusal to respond, disrupts that illusion. It requires them to confront the unease they've been trying to sidestep the whole time. The reality that connection requires risk, requires exposure, requires showing up. And that's where your power is. When you cease to try to control their feelings, when you cease to try to rescue or prove yourself to them, you change the entire dynamic. You move from being emotionally reactive to emotionally free. You model for them that love doesn't equal losing yourself. You demonstrate that control doesn't reside in a hold over someone else. It resides in becoming master of yourself. That's where real strength resides. I want you to consider that for a moment. Each time you withhold your energy with intent, you're not only walking away, you're showing them something they've never seen. That connection founded in fear will always fail, but connection founded in truth can flourish. They may not even know it at first. They may even double down on their avoidance. But as time goes on, your silence becomes a mirror. It reflects to them what they've been trying to escape: the loneliness, the fear, the emotional isolation. And that reflection can become the thing that causes them to wake up and see their need for change. So when you consider what avoidants wish for, when you go no contact, consider this: they wish for control, for emotional safety, for the ability to remain untouched. But what they usually find instead is that actual control has nothing to do with distance. It has to do with courage, the courage to feel, to confront themselves, to connect without fear. And for you, your silence isn't punitive. It's about transcending the illusion, opting for growth instead of reaction, peace instead of chaos. Because when you opt out of the game of control, you move into something so much bigger: freedom. And that's when it all flips. There's something so incredibly powerful about silence, genuine, intentional silence. When you go no contact, when you stop chasing, explaining, and defending, that silence gets louder than any words ever could. It's not coldness, and it's not manipulation. It's communication at the highest level. It says, I've said all I need to say. Now I'm letting my energy do the talking. And trust me, people feel that, especially avoidance. They feel that sudden emptiness, that shift in vibration, even if they pretend they don't. Avoidants live in a cycle of emotional push and pull. They crave closeness, but when it's offered, they retreat. They want connection, but they fear being consumed by it. When you finally break out of that cycle, when you remain silent, it breaks their rhythm. Initially, they think your silence confirms their narrative. See, I knew this person would quit. I knew I wasn't mistaken in distrusting them. But over time, something shifts. The silence that initially consoled them now pushes up against their walls. It becomes awkward. It makes them question, makes them feel. And that's the start of awareness. Notice your silence makes room for both of you, For them, it's a space of reflection. For you, it's a space of healing. You're not penalizing them, you're investing in your peace. You're demonstrating that love isn't about begging to be visible, it's about knowing your value even when someone else can't meet you there. Silence becomes your boundary, your message, your strength. You're saying, I refuse to participate in patterns that drain me. I refuse to explain my value to someone who can't recognize it. And here's the thing most people don't get. Your silence shifts the energy dynamic entirely. When you were being engaged explaining, overgiving, they could remain in their comfort zone. They could count on your emotional labor to keep things connected. But when you remove that energy, the imbalance reveals itself. Suddenly, they're faced with their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own fears, and that's where the change begins. Avoidants tend to believe that your silence is only temporary, that you'll come back when you've cooled off, that they can pick up where they left off without doing anything different. Your persistence at that silence is powerful. Teaching connection takes presence. It takes work. It takes emotional authenticity. When you cut off the fuel for the dynamic, you cut off the enablement for the pattern. They can't help but confront the emptiness they've created. And sometimes that's the only thing that awakens a person. What's so amazing is that quiet doesn't just change them, it changes you. Because within the quiet, you find yourself again. You see how much energy you've been spending attempting to repair, attempting to prove, attempting to be heard, and within the quiet, you recall that peace is your birthright. You begin to understand that love shouldn't feel like pursuing. It must feel like flow, like balance, like shared effort. You come to cherish your own being so much that silence no longer feels empty. It feels holy. So when you go no contact and remain silent, know this, your silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's strength clothed in self-respect. You're not closing a door. You're making room for clarity, for growth, for truth to reveal itself. Perhaps they'll walk into that place with you someday, perhaps not. Either way, though, you win because your silence is your strength, your serenity, your evidence that you don't accept connection that expends your peacefulness. And that, my friend, is when your silence speaks louder than any argument, any apology, any request for comprehension. It becomes the noise of your growth. When you take no contact, one of the things avoidants secretly wish for, usually without even knowing it, is that you'll eventually return just like they had it before. They wish that time will make things okay, that you'll miss them enough to contact them, that you'll reappear in their life so they can feel wanted again, validated again, but without having to deal with the pain of change. They desire the comfort of your love without the cost of emotional development. And it's not that they are evil, it's because their nervous system has learned to associate proximity with danger. Change is dangerous, risk is threatening, so they hold on to this unspoken hope. Maybe they'll return, and everything can once again be as it was. But that way it was is the very thing that severed the connection in the first place. The dynamic you once had, over giving, over explaining, or bearing the emotional burden, can't happen anymore if you really respect your peace. So your absence is a test not of love, but of expansion. Can they grow enough to meet you where you stand today? Can they shed the armor briefly enough to sense what they've been stifling? That's the choice point your silence makes. First, they may confuse your no contact as a short-term response, something you'll come out of when you cool down. They may even experience relief, thinking the squeeze is off. They can remain in their comfort zone that much longer. But when weeks turn to months, and you do not come racing back to fill the void, something changes. The emptiness starts to feel more substantial. That quiet space begins to whisper realities they have pushed aside for so long. The awareness creeps in. You're not waiting anymore. You're healing, and that awareness breaks the foundation of their fantasy. Avoidants frequently yearn for closeness, but on their own terms, terms that safeguard their emotional barriers. They desire love without abandonment, intimacy without vulnerability, but your silence makes them witness the reality of how relationships don't function that way. Love is not one-way traffic. It's a mutual territory in which both individuals present themselves completely. When you cease presenting yourself to the relationship and they continue to be distant, they finally experience the disequilibrium they have been maintaining, and that is often the initiation of awareness. When they realize you're not returning to the old version of the relationship is both painful and powerful. Painful because it challenges their deepest fears of abandonment. Powerful because it opens the door to transformation. They start to see that if they truly want connection, they have to step into vulnerability. They have to do the work. They can no longer count on you to be the emotional anchor as they float. Your quietness, your removal is the mirror that bounces back their avoidance to them. And for you, this stage is every bit as transformative because you're not holding out for their growth. You're forging your own. You're coming to understand that love constructed on fear isn't love, it's neediness. You're remembering your own worth independent of their approval. You're seeing that your worth isn't based on being picked, it's based on how deeply you pick yourself. That's the heart of healing. When an avoidant wishes you'd come back the way you were, let that be the cue to stand even taller in your evolution. Because if they need you back, they're going to have to rise. They're going to have to meet you in your truth, not your wounds. And if they can't, that's okay. Your path isn't one of trying to prove yourself to someone who shies away from theirs. It's one of entering into the kind of power that doesn't pursue, doesn't beg, doesn't settle. The kind of power that declares, if you can't meet me in truth, I'll walk alone in peace. It's then that the actual change occurs, when love ceases to be about coming back and becomes about growing. There is a point where absence no longer feels like a response and begins to be a discovery. When you go no contact, something remarkable happens, not just for you, but for the avoidant too. Initially, your absence is like empty space, like silence, like a respite to someone who has lived with emotional claustrophobia their entire life. But as the days go by, that same empty space begins to resonate. It becomes a reflection of what they've been trying to escape. It becomes the wake up call they never knew was coming. Avoidants exist in perpetual motion, emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. They flee from closeness not because they don't care, but because they've learned that closeness means danger. They've constructed a life on keeping people at arm's length. But when you retreat, when you pull your energy away entirely, that habit has nowhere to flee. The silence they once employed as protection now turns against them. It becomes the very thing that comes to face them. Abruptly, they feel what they've shunned all along: the hollowness, the isolation, the price of separation, and that's the power of absence. It uncovers truth. Because when someone no longer has access to your presence, your warmth, your reliability, they realize what those things really did mean. What they once took for granted begins to burden them. They start to feel the absence you once filled not as shame but as clarity. The truth strikes connection is not a given. It takes effort, consistency, and emotional courage. And when they see they didn't show up for that, it becomes a mirror they can't turn away from. For most avoidants, this wake-up call doesn't arrive with fireworks or tears. It arrives silently on a late evening when they move to their phone and catch themselves, when they browse through old texts and catch that bitterness of nostalgia, when they realize the emotional numbness they once confused with peace. It's those quiet moments when they begin to sense the reality of your absence, not only the physical one, but the emotional. The understanding that they pushed something real, something earthy, something true away. And here's the thing: this awareness isn't always about them running back to you. Sometimes it's merely the first fissure in the suit, the first gasp of consciousness. Whether or not they do anything with it isn't your job, it's theirs. Because the intention of your absence was never to goad or control, it was to take back your peace, to stop the cycle, to discontinue draining energy into a dynamic that wasn't being returned. But the side effect of that boundary is change. It makes truth emerge. And for you, that truth is freeing. You begin to understand that love isn't established by your being there, it's established by your not being there. Because the ones who matter don't require your incessant pursuit to appreciate your value. They experience it even when you're not present. You come to know that walking away isn't losing someone, it's gaining yourself. You're no longer motivated by the fear of being forgotten. You're motivated by the freedom of self-worth. The wake-up call of absence is strong because it doesn't just awaken them, it awakens you. It reminds you that you were never meant to be the one standing in the emotional line for two people. It reminds you that your peace is worth something, that your silence is powerful, and that your absence is sometimes the most loving thing you can do to yourself and to them. And that's why this moment is sacred. It's not the end, it's a rebirth. It's the place where illusion gives way to awareness. Because sometimes it takes the sound of nothing to finally hear the truth of everything. Would you have me continue with primary point 5 or emotional avoidance as self-protection? Next, keeping you need to learn something basic about avoidance. Their emotional space isn't a rejection of you. It's a shield for protecting themselves. What appears to be coldness is quite likely fear. What feels like indifference is most likely pain buried for years. Avoidants don't wake up one morning deciding to fear closeness. They become avoidant because somewhere along the way, love started to feel unsafe. Vulnerability became a threat, not a gift, so they learned to survive by staying detached. That distance is their defense mechanism. It's their way of saying, I won't let anyone hurt me again. But there's the tragedy of that protection. It not only keeps others out, but it keeps them in. Each wall they construct around their heart might keep pain out, but also keeps connection, warmth, joy, and intimacy out. They yearn for closeness, yet do not trust it. They yearn for love, yet are afraid to let themselves be swallowed by it. So they do the one thing that feels safest. They pull away, they retreat, they assure themselves that independence is peace, but in truth, it's usually isolation masquerading as it. When you walk away, no contact, you touch that terror unwittingly in them. Your quiet shatters their script of emotional withdrawal. They may have expected distance would leave them in charge, but when that distance is forever, when your energy is truly gone, their self-protection begins to feel like a jail. They start to realize the price of their own evasion. Their loneliness, which they've been trying to avoid, comes to visit them, and for the first time, there's no distraction, no pursuit, no reassurance, just them. And that is where their inner conflict starts. This is what most people don't notice. Avoidants often wish to love intensely. They just don't know how to do it without terror. Most of them came from backgrounds where emotional needs were not met, where feelings only resulted in disappointment or humiliation. So their brain learned to connect closeness with loss. Anytime someone gets too close, old fears begin to creep in. What if I get hurt again? What if I'm not enough? What if I lose myself? Their mind promises them distance is safety, but their heart longs for connection. It's a tug of war between longing and fear. Now, that doesn't imply that you're going to excuse or enable their behavior. Knowing their fear doesn't translate to accepting emotional neglect. It just means that you stop taking their distance personally, that you stop making their avoidance something about you, because it isn't about you. It's about their wiring, their past, their unhealed wounds. And knowing that sets you free. That lets you stop trying to repair them, stop seeking validation, and instead work on healing yourself. When you set no contact, you're not punishing them. You're holding your ground while respecting their boundary. You're telling them, I know you're shielding yourself, but I have to shield my peace as well. And that act is an act of love, not for them necessarily, but for you. Because love without boundaries isn't love, it's sacrifice. And over time, that silence could ask them to confront their own patterns. It could push them toward growth, self-reflection, perhaps healing. But even if it doesn't, you move forward. You realize that your empathy is not about endurance. That compassion is not about overextension, that you can see someone's hurt without taking it in. Tony Robbins is known to say, the quality of your life is the quality of your relationships with others and with yourself. And that's what this point is really about. You can't establish a healthy relationship with someone who's still on the run from themselves. The best you can do is stand in your truth, hold your peace, and allow your absence to do what your words no longer can, because in so doing you teach a strong lesson, one that all avoidant hearts must eventually learn. Protection without vulnerability isn't strength, it's stagnation. And growth, true growth, only starts the minute you stop hiding from what hurts. Boundaries, most people read that word and think it means wall building, but the reality is boundaries aren't about shutting people out, they're about keeping your peace intact. They're not punishment, they're protection. They're not about control, they're about clarity. When you become no contact, that boundary is one of the biggest gifts you can offer to yourself and ironically, even to the avoidant, because it's in that clear, steadfast boundary that both individuals are finally allowed to glimpse what's real and what's illusion. For the avoidant, your boundary is a mirror. It reflects to them that love isn't endless tolerance. That bond isn't unfettered access. They've had to work for so long in a realm where emotional distance protected them, where they could step back and know you'd close the gap, you'd reach out, forgive, try again. When you stop doing that, when you stop fueling the pattern, they realize something they never have before: consequence. Not punishment, but awareness. Awareness that relationships must be balanced, effort required on both sides with accountability, and for you that boundary is freedom. It's the moment you say, I will not sacrifice myself to make someone else comfortable. You quit explaining your value, quit proving yourself, quit giving in to a place that doesn't give back. You begin treating yourself with the respect you've always accorded others. And here's the lovely irony: when you finally choose yourself, you don't lose power, you gain it. Because your energy is no longer dispersed in attempting to please or repair, it becomes centered, serene, rooted. You begin to become peace rather than pursuing it. Avoidants tend to take boundaries as rejection when really they're an offer. They tell the other, if you're going to get close to me, it has to be safe for us both. It has to be authentic, and whether or not the other is able to meet that threshold, you've won already because you've raised your own. You've created a new ground level for what love should feel like. You've taught that connection without respect is not connection at all. When Tony Robbins discusses standards, he explains, we don't get what we want. We get what we tolerate. And that's what boundaries do. They resettle what you tolerate. They redefine what you're available for. You're no longer available for one-sided effort, for emotional breadcrumbs, for uncertainty-based relationships. You're available for depth, reciprocity, and truth. Your no-contact boundary communicates a powerful message, not out of bitterness, but out of alignment. It communicates, I choose growth over guilt. I choose peace over patterns. I choose myself. And in that choice, you start to vibrate on a different level. People pick up on that. They may not get it, but they feel it. That peaceful confidence, that solid energy, it's magnetic. You stop chasing, and life begins meeting you where you are. And this is the best part often. Your boundary is what sets them up to finally confront themselves, because your silence, your strength, your peace, it makes them wonder about their own avoidance. They glimpse what healthy detachment is like. They experience what self-respect is like, and that can stir something deep inside of them. The urge to heal, to grow, to engage differently. But whether they do or not is not your concern. Your role isn't to wait for someone else to evolve. Your role is to continue evolving yourself, to maintain your standard, to guard your energy like it's holy, because it is. Boundaries are love in action. They're the bridge between chaos and peace, codependency and confidence. When you go no contact and someone labels you as cold, distant, or unloving, keep this in mind. Boundaries aren't about walls. They're about doors. You're not shutting people out. You're choosing who gets to walk through and on what terms. That's not selfish. That's awareness. That's the kind of love that creates unshatterable peace. There's something extremely powerful and sometimes painful about what occurs when you draw your energy back. When you go no contact, you don't vanish from someone's life. You become a mirror, a quiet, inescapable reflection of all that they've been trying not to see. For the avoidant, that mirror is shocking, because now, without your energy to buffer, without your presence to deflect them, they have to sit with themselves. And that reflection doesn't lie. It indicates the patterns, the fears, the avoidance, the emotional walls. It tells us not only whom they love, but whom they've been avoiding loving themselves. See, when you were present, trying to talk, to listen, fill the gap, you were doing the emotional heavy lifting. You were the grounding force, the connection point, the emotional translator. But when you get out of the way, when your energy goes still, everything shifts. The avoidant can no longer project their discomfort onto you. They can't say, you're too much or you're the problem, because the noise is gone. And in that quiet, truth has nowhere to hide. They begin to see their patterns for what they are, defense mechanisms, not destiny. At first, that mirror feels threatening. Avoidants are used to turning away from emotions, not toward them. So when your silence holds up that mirror, their natural response is to resist it, to justify, to downplay, to flee. But the longer the silence, the clearer the reflection, they begin to feel the hollowness that previously masqueraded as peace. They begin to realize that emotional distance is not freedom, it's solitude. And finally, they can't hide from it. This mirror effect doesn't just wake them up, it empowers you. Because while they're dealing with themselves, you're getting to know you again. You begin to realize how much energy you were investing in maintaining a connection that wasn't being returned. You notice the parts of you that did tolerate inconsistency, the wounds that kept you clinging to possibility rather than actuality. The same mirror shows you what needs healing, what needs honoring, what needs letting go. And that's where transformation really starts. The beauty of this mirror is that it's neutral. It doesn't judge, it just reflects. It doesn't scream or beg or demand. It simply mirrors truth, and truth is where growth happens. Tony Robbins has said many times, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. And that's precisely what occurs here for both of you. The avoidant sees the truth about their avoidance. You start to realize the reality of your own value. And while that is a difficult process, it's radically freeing. When you are peaceful rather than driven, serene rather than frantic, you model for the avoidant what it means to be emotionally mature. Your vibe is an unconscious message, I don't have to pursue you in order to love you. I don't need to rescue you in order to care. I can love myself enough to take a step back. That's strong. Because mirrors don't heal forcefully, they heal with clarity, and sometimes your calm does more to spark change than your words ever could. This is why no contact isn't just about space, it's about transformation. It's not about proving a point, it's about creating reflection. Whether or not they ever act on what they see is irrelevant. The mirror has already done its work because you've stopped engaging in illusion and started living in truth. So if they ever return, it won't be because you drove them away. It'll be because they finally confronted the mirror your leaving had held up for them. And if they don't, that's all right too. Because in holding up that mirror, you confronted your own, you learned to see your patterns, to heal your wounds, and to stand in your power. And that is the actual genius of the mirror effect. It doesn't merely reveal other people who they are, it reveals you who you've become. True love, genuine aware, level love isn't formed in places of comfort. It's discovered in places of challenge. It's tried by silence, by distance, by the room where old patterns break down and new patterns insist on arising. When you become no contact, you're not only imposing space, you're testing the bond itself. You're allowing both of you to learn if what you shared was attachment or real, fear or freedom, chemistry or commitment, and that test, though it hurts, is sacred. Avoidants typically get emotional intensity confused with danger. They need closeness, but when it comes, it's unsafe. When you distance yourself, they want it to restore the equilibrium. Distance, they believe, will still the turbulence. But true love doesn't dissolve in distance. It increases in consciousness. That's what no contact shows. It inquires, is this love based on need or is it based on truth? Can it exist without the constant validation, the relentless pursuit, the psychological turmoil? Because if love falls in silence, it was never rooted to start with. Where in that quiet space something deep occurs, the emotional din thins, and what's left is clarity. The avoidant begins to notice what love is when it's not being chased, when there's no one to respond to, no one to blame, no one to manage. They start to see that love isn't about running from pain, it's about growing up from it. That fear of being overwhelmed by love has been what kept them from truly experiencing it. And perhaps that realization is the seed of change. For you, this trial of true love is even more profound because you start to understand that love isn't about gritting it out, it's about alignment. You quit getting effort mistaken for worthiness. You release the idea that pursuit of someone emotionally unavailable is evidence of devotion. Rather, you find a new type of love, one that begins with you. You begin to ask, what kind of love do I want to have? What kind of connection respects my peace, my boundaries, my growth? And the instant you ask those questions, you enter a higher vibration of love. Tony Robbins is famous for saying, the purpose of a relationship is not to get, it's to grow and to give. And that's what this phase is all about. When the avoidant confronts their fear and starts opening, they learn. When you confront your attachment and decide on peace over pursuit, you learn. That's the true test of love. Whether you remain together is not important, but if you both become better people in the process, at times this test results in reconciliation, at times results in release. Both are wins when they are based on truth, because real love doesn't require that someone be different for you. It asks them to grow with you. And if they cannot meet you there, it doesn't mean you've lost. It means you've passed the test. You've demonstrated that your love isn't based on control, that your peace isn't up for negotiation, and that your worth isn't conditional. This type of love, the true type, is not delicate. It does not break under strain. It cleanses through it. When you choose to stop running and instead choose yourself, establish the ground for true love to grow, love that is aware, harmonious, grounded in honor, love that can tolerate silence, endure distance, and learn through adversity. If your absence brings the cracks in the bond to light, don't consider that failure, consider it clarity, because love that couldn't handle truth was never love. It was attachment disguising itself. The test of real love presents what's authentic. It reveals if someone is willing to come meet you in expansion or be left behind in fear. And when you opt for truth, you never lose, you only rise. Because ultimately, true love doesn't make you shrink to fit it. It grows to adjust to you where you've expanded. Removing your energy is perhaps the most empowering thing you can ever do for yourself. Because when you go no contact, you're not merely walking away from another human being, you're walking back to your power, you're reclaiming every shred of energy you've ever invested in chasing, explaining, and attempting to prove love that never needed to be proven. For years, you could have been investing yourself in someone who wasn't emotionally available, believing the more you loved them, they'd be the one to become safe enough to return your affection. But the reality is that you were never supposed to save them. You were supposed to save yourself. Avoidants tend to drain the energy of people who care about them, not out of malice, because their emotional walls generate a kind of disequilibrium. They pull back, you open yourself, they shut down, and that push and pull leaves you in a cycle of emotional exhaustion. You begin to conflate effort and connection, believing that the more you give, the closer you'll be. What actually occurs is you begin running on empty. Your peace is gone. Your confidence is shaken. Your identity begins to revolve around their inconsistency. That's when you realize you need to take back your energy. And taking back your energy doesn't equal anger. It equals alignment. It's not being, you hurt me, I'm done. It's being, I deserve to feel whole. You cease waiting for closure, because closure is something you create from within yourself. You cease attempting to get them to get it, because getting it isn't healing. You begin redirecting all that energy you used to expend on them inward into your growth, your peace, your joy. That's when you start to rise. Tony Robbins is always saying, where focus goes, energy flows. Ponder that. As long as your attention was on the avoidant, on what they weren't giving, on what they weren't saying, your energy went toward lack. The minute you bring that focus back to you, everything shifts. You begin nourishing your spirit rather than your wounds. You see that peace is not something they can provide you with. It's something you've had all along inside of you, just waiting to be recalled. In that quiet, your strength begins to come back to you. You feel lighter. You find yourself aware of how much mental and emotional room you have now that you're no longer overthinking every text, every silence, every emotional distancing. That room becomes fertile soil for healing. You start to invest that reclaimed energy into things that stretch you, your passions, your vision, your purpose. And with each new edge, with each act of self-love, with each time you opt for peace instead of reaction, your vibration increases. The avoidant may not get it yet. They may even sense that shift in energy as a loss, because for the first time, you're no longer there to fill their void, but that's not your work to do anymore. You don't owe it to anyone else to heal. You owe it to yourself to align. And ironically, that's what makes your energy magnetic once more. When you're rooted in your value, you don't need to pursue. The right people, the right opportunities, and the right love start to align with you automatically. Getting your energy back is remembering that the value of who you were never depended on what you gave, but who you are. You are not measured by the love that failed. The love that survived is what defines you. With each silence you take instead of chaos, each time you exercise self-respect rather than validation, peace rather than proving, you move further into your power. And someday you'll sit back and understand that going no contact wasn't about losing a person. It was about gaining yourself. You didn't lose energy, you channeled it. You didn't lose love, you redefined it. And in doing so, you find something avoidants seldom find until much later: freedom. Freedom from having to fix, pursue, to prove, freedom to just be. Because once you reclaim your energy, you no longer live in reaction, you live in creation. And that's where your true life begins. Transformation through detachment is when all of it finally makes sense. It's the point where all the silence, the boundaries, the pain, and the reflection come together, and you can see how it all fits. You understand that releasing wasn't the end of something, it was the beginning of you. When you went no contact, you didn't leave someone. You returned to your power, your peace, your truth. Detachment, in its purest sense, isn't about not caring. It's about caring greatly, but from a position of freedom, not fear. It's about loving without losing yourself. Avoidants wish that your distance would lose potency, that your silence would only be a momentary thing, that someday things will go back to the way they were. Detachment shifts that dynamic in perpetuity, because detachment doesn't equate to disconnection. It equates to emotional clarity. You remain to see them with empathy, yet you no longer bear their wounds as your own. You continue to recall the good times, yet you no longer reside there. You come to realize that love doesn't need attachment to be meaningful. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let go of what was never supposed to develop in its present shape. Through detachment, you cease to react and begin to observe. You cease to try to control and begin to trust timing. The silence of the avoidant no longer provokes your anxiety. It merely indicates their willingness, or not, to genuine intimacy. You no longer require closure, for you've provided it to yourself. You no longer pursue comprehension, for peace has become your new tongue. And that transformation, that quiet, mighty shift is change. Tony Robbins always says, life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. Detachment makes you realize that every disappointment, every withdrawal, every unreturned message wasn't rejection, it was redirection. It was life indicating to you where you were giving your power away, where you were still looking outside of yourself for validation. Detachment makes those lessons wisdom. It leads you to understand that your peace isn't negotiable and your energy isn't up for discount. And something incredible occurs when you let go with love. You ascend, you start vibrating at a higher level, one where you attract individuals who greet you with the same openness, the same maturity, the same depth, the kind of love that doesn't require fixing or rescuing, the kind of connection that feels effortless because it's authentic. And even if the avoidant eventually returns, you'll meet that moment from strength, not need. You won't go back. You'll move forward, either together in truth or apart in peace, because your growth will have already shifted everything. Detachment doesn't equal disliking. It equals liking consciously. It equals being able to wish someone good while still choosing yourself. You can have compassion without losing your boundaries. You can care without attaching. That's not coldness, that's evolution. That's emotional mastery. That's what enables you to live from purpose rather than pain, from alignment rather than fear. And that's what all this journey was taking you to. Not to make the avoidance shift, not to make them get it, but to wake up the part of you that finally gets yourself. The part of you that whispers, I don't need to pursue love to be complete, I am complete. And so when you get to this place where silence is no longer painful, where peace comes easily, where your heart feels open but unmoored, that's when you know you've changed. You've become what every spirit on this path is actually looking for, free, grounded, loving, and irreparably at peace. Because detachment doesn't end love, it takes it to a higher place, and from there, all of it, healing, growth, new beginnings, greater connection, naturally unfolds. That's where true freedom resides. That's where your power starts. And that's the change no avoidant ever anticipates, one every awakened heart sooner or later attains, undefined, and from there, life begins to expand once more with greater peace, greater love, greater light, and greater presence of the true you.